Hello and welcome. Thank you for your interest in my presentation. My name is Maggie Lieb and I teach at Mukogawa Women's University in Japan. And the theme of my presentation is peer review in ELT, inclusivity or exclusivity. So what I'd like to cover today is the importance of peer review, problems with peer review. I will describe 4 of my recent experiences with peer review, and I will end with implications and recommendations. So let's start with the importance of peer review. In an age of misinformation, fake news, alternative facts, and conspiracy theories, and even more concerning, numerous reports that attempts are being made by political operatives to slow down the release of politically inconvenient data in relation especially to societal threats such as COVID and climate change, peer review has never been more important. There is a pressing need to filter the noise and distinguish factual information from misinformation. The academic community needs to empower the public to critically evaluate and use the information that they receive. Thus, scholarly communities, through the process of peer review, are charged with enhancing their disciplines, producing new knowledge, encouraging the progression of technology and practice, as well as educating the public. So it's no surprise that some form of peer review has been in use for more than 300 years. So peer review has been described as the linchpin about which the whole business of science is pivoted. Peer review is considered the most rigorous means for appraisal in all branches of research and human endeavour, and it seeks to locate the most promising research and generate fundamental knowledge. While peer review should enable the creation of new knowledge through stewardship, and as such should be balanced and objective, it still, however, has problems. The subjective nature of peer review is often manifested in conflicting reviews of manuscripts, which I will describe shortly. Elitism and personal jealousy can sometimes impede the publication of research. Sometimes conclusions that align with reviewers' opinions are more likely to be evaluated favorably than those that contradict reviewers' opinions. There's also the problem of entrenchment in the status quo, wherein reviewers are more concerned with preserving their agendas or reputations than in maintaining openness to novel and innovative research. Instead, they sometimes prefer to shape the discipline in their own image. And lastly, there is the perception of scholarship as an old boy network or a popularity contest, which is manifested in various ways. Peer review in English language teaching is not immune to problems. So TOE, for example, has identified the problems of narrowness and reductionism, which, if not attended to by editors, may render the process a site of oppression. In a critical analysis of the anonymous review of 4 manuscripts to ELT and applied linguistics publications, TOE problematized the sometimes partial and ideological nature of the peer review process. He has called for openness and cautioned against closed-mindedness. Openness is predicated on the negotiated nature of knowledge and the ethicality of being open to new ways to understanding the world, new ways of learning and solving problems. On the other hand, closed-mindedness has its subversive effect on the engenderment of greater critical awareness and fails to accept differing ideas in educational undertakings. Failure to attend to these issues impinges on ethicality as they result in suppression of voice, impede the dissemination of research, and threaten academic freedom. So it has to be acknowledged that it is not possible to publish all submissions, as this would be detrimental to the overall quality of research. And the number of publications is restricted by the limited space in academic journals. However, based on recommendations from the literature, decisions to publish or reject should be approached through a clear, fair, open process. Reviewers should have experience with research and publishing, and reviewers should also have subject matter expertise. So, describing my experience, my first manuscript that I will discuss was submitted to a Japan-based academic journal seeking articles on social sciences and humanities topics related to intercultural relations. The title of the paper was An Investigation of the Relationship Between Cultural Dimensions of Learning and English Language Proficiency. And this was a quantitative correlational explanatory exploration of the connection between cultural learning preferences and English language proficiency. So this journal uses the double-blind review process and has 4 reviewing options: accept or accept with minor corrections, accept with revisions, reject but willing to see another version for a future issue, and reject. So the differences between options 2, 3, and 4 did not seem completely clear, as willing to see another version suggests that if the requested revisions were made, that the manuscript could be resubmitted. So this was the initial response I got from the editor by email. My paper was reviewed by 2 reviewers. They did not agree, so the paper was passed to a 3rd reviewer, and they determined that the paper was not yet suitable for publication. So this journal's evaluation was based on a scale of 1 to 7, and this is the form that they used. Clearly, reviewer 1 was satisfied with the quality of the manuscript, but there are substantial inconsistencies in the feedback from all 3 reviewers. Reviewer 3 somewhat disagreed that the research methods were appropriate, but still gave a rating of 4, along with the comment, "I am not trained in quantitative methods." There were also discrepancies in the reviewer feedback. So reviewer 1 said that the paper was well written, well organized, had clear explanations and arguments, that it was informative, and that it was helpful to the journal readers. However, reviewer 2 misrepresented the manuscript in several ways, and these are just a few examples. Reviewer 2 said, the conclusion, "There is no correlation between cultural learning styles and TOEFL score," is simplistic. But the actual statement in the manuscript was, "The data failed to reveal any statistically significant relationships between cultural learning preferences and TOEFL scores." So there's a big distinction between saying the data failed to reveal and there is no. The second comment from reviewer 2 suggested that my instrument did not reveal Japanese students' learning preferences, but this is based on the assumption that the only valid preferences are strong preferences, and this instrument revealed weak preferences. Reviewer 2 also suggested changing the wording of the research question, but this suggestion to do this after the completion of the study raises questions about research ethics and transparency. So given this experience, I withdrew the manuscript as I felt I wouldn't receive a fair and impartial evaluation. So I submitted the same manuscript to an international online ESL/EFL journal, where submissions undergo initial review by an editor, and the editor sends the submission to at least 2 knowledgeable scholars for a detailed review. So this was the initial response sent to me by the editor: revisions required. So this was more hopeful than the previous submission. However, there were also substantial differences in the length and quality of the responses I got from the 2 reviewers. For starters, reviewer A's feedback was short, about 70 words, and non-specific. And you can see that it also contained typos. It suggested revising the research question retroactively, and no specifics were given for why this reviewer considered the conclusion to be weak. However, reviewer B gave substantial constructive feedback of 921 words. Reviewer B said that the paper was well written and thoughtful, and a contribution to our understanding of the relationship between culture and language teaching and learning, which I very much enjoyed reading. I believe that only a few tweaks are necessary for acceptance and publication. So this encouraging comment was followed by detailed feedback on each section of the manuscript. There were many helpful comments from reviewer B, such as this one, mostly encouraging me to incorporate more criticisms and limitations of my theoretical constructs and instruments. So I went through and addressed each and every comment made by this reviewer and sent it back. After a few months, I sent a follow-up email and received this response, that my paper was sent out for a second round of review. So this was the second round of feedback that I received. It was described as a much improved manuscript, made a stronger case for your concluding arguments. And the third recommendation was a little bit surprising. The reviewer suggested that I change my wording from "it is possible that the study's findings could have been different" to "it is highly likely that this study's findings could have been different," considering that much of the previous feedback was to use more hedging devices. However, it was a minor issue, so I addressed it. And this was the final response that came about a month later. The decision was to accept the submission. So from start to finish, the whole process took about a year. The next manuscript that I submitted was submitted to an SLA International Research Journal based in Australia. The submission guidelines included two stipulations. One was that self-citation was not permitted unless the citation was from a Scopus Index journal, and the second was on whom to cite. Authors are required to include at least 2 citations of the journal itself and one from one of its sister journals. So even before submitting, I had to find references to these journals and figure out how to work them into the manuscript. So the manuscript was a quantitative investigation of culture distance in English language classes at Japanese universities. Specifically, the study compared the cultural learning preferences of 119 freshman Japanese university students and 24 native English-speaking teachers. The study found statistically significant differences, but practical significance was small. So this was the initial response I got from the editor: resubmit with revisions. And I was told your revised paper will be sent for an additional blind peer review. So I was again faced with conflicting feedback from the reviewers. Reviewer 1 said that the abstract and introduction were not acceptable and no specifics were given. Reviewer 1 also said, theoretically the point is well made, but its practical significance is not clear. We do not know much about the author's local context. However, I responded by saying my local context was not really relevant, as the study was conducted among students and teachers at different universities in Japan. This is why I provided information on the overall context of English language teaching in Japan in Literature Review, paragraph 2. And the third comment from reviewer 1 talked about what I presume were motives behind carrying this research. And I pointed out that paragraph 3 of the literature review addresses motives which were ensuring positive outcomes in cross-cultural learning environments. Reviewer 2 said that the literature review is a very clear explanation of a complex area of research, and also said, I'm impressed that you have been willing to acknowledge the criticisms of cross-cultural approaches before proposing a way forward. So reviewer 2 made several comments which I found to be constructive. So in the manuscript, I had said, the culture distance between Japanese students and native English-speaking teachers may not be as large as the literature suggests, and students and teachers may have adjusted to each other's teaching and learning styles. To which reviewer 2 responded, these are key points. Each point can be supported or contradicted by the analysis of data you make later. I suggest you use these 2 possible interpretations to structure the rest of your discussion. Another statement from the manuscript was that findings that emerge from self-reported data should be interpreted with caution. Reviewer 2 agreed with this and said, this is one of several very good points that belong in a separate section, limitations and further research. So I did follow Reviewer 2's recommendations in this case. However, I didn't agree with everything that Reviewer 2 said. And this is an example. The Reviewer 2 commented that philosophical considerations may be relevant in the literature review, but not in the discussion since your study does not shed light on them. However, I decided to retain the references because I felt that these at least partially explained my inconclusive findings and the ambiguity contained therein. I felt that this was a subjective statement on the part of Reviewer 2, who had also suggested cutting this reference from the abstract on the conclusion. So I went ahead and resubmitted the manuscript, and a few months later got this response. So this time I was told that my research questions were sound when others had said I should change them retroactively, and my literature review was thorough, but now I was faced with justifying my data analysis method. This reviewer felt that I should have used non-parametric instead of parametric tests. So this was the first reviewer to comment on the data analysis method. So I went back to the drawing board and included a rationale for using parametric data. The current status of this paper is that it has been resubmitted and is pending. So the fourth experience with peer review was my submission of a chapter to an edited volume. The theme of the volume was that it was a compilation of autoethnographic narratives of transnational practitioners in TESOL. There was no anonymity as the editor and I had met at a conference previously, and there was a clear timeline laid out from submission of proposals to publication. The submission of proposals was December 2018 with a completion date of 2020. So this was my submission. The title was Challenges and Successes in Negotiating Identity and Asserting Agency as an Irish Transcultural Boundary-Spanning ELT Academic. And this was an autoethnographic account of my decades as an international migrant, living, studying and working first in the US and later in Japan, while maintaining close ties to my home, Ireland. So this was the initial response I got from the editor. The editor said that they had received more than 55 submissions, and so they decided to compile the chapters across at least 2 separate books. So I would characterize the feedback I received as a perfect balance between positive and constructive feedback. So among the positive feedback were comments from the editor that he would use my manuscript as a sample autoethnography for his graduate students. He said it was very well written, but asked me to attend to the lengthy sentences. Constructive feedback included comments like this, where I was asked to briefly explain my methodology, how I constructed my narrative snapshots. He also suggested using the term autoethnography instead of reflexive ethnography. And in another place, he asked me to expand and unpack some of my arguments. So the current status of this manuscript is that it has been accepted. The publication date is 2021 in this volume. The e-version of this volume will be available in November. So I have to say that all in all, this was a positive and professional experience, which I feel still achieved the goal of academic rigor. So the original purpose of this research was to answer the question, do peer review processes restrict the dissemination of fact-based, data-driven research and thereby threaten academic freedom? In some cases, the answer is yes. In my experience with peer reviews 1, 2, and 3, these all revealed the subjective and often biased nature of peer review in the conflicting reviews received and in discrepancies within individual reviewers' comments. Narrowness and reductionism was also evident in misrepresentations and distortions of the manuscript's content, along with vague comments lacking in specificity and requests to alter my conclusions to fit the reviewer's worldviews. This second point is problematic as it suggests the desire of some reviewers to shape the discipline in their own image. Of course, there were many ways in which these processes were positive and did help to ensure rigor and assist in the publication of quality research. Each process had at least one professional reviewer or editor who offered constructive and helpful feedback that improved the quality of the manuscripts. And in the case of peer review 4, the book chapter, this was the most positive experience I had that provided both mentoring and challenge and was a good example of stewardship in the creation of new knowledge. I should repeat that peer review 4 was the only case where there was no anonymity. And I feel that the personal relationships made the process much more conducive to encouraging and constructive dialogue. Based on these experiences and on the literature analysing peer review, I would offer the following recommendations. 1. Rethink double anonymity. It's supposed to eliminate bias and result in fair evaluations of manuscripts, but it also potentially allows reviewers to hide behind their anonymity, sometimes leading to harsh feedback. 2. Consider procedures for selection and training of reviewers and where to direct manuscripts. This is a suggestion for editors. Reviewers should have expertise related to the submissions they review with regard to content and methodology. 3. Understand the limitations of a standardized reviewer form. A standardized reviewer form is not immune to the partiality of the reviewers and is only as good as the training they receive in its use. Editors should continue to work towards ensuring its validity. And 4, reviewers should embrace their role of stewardship in the creation of new knowledge and avoid the temptation to name or construct the world for others. They should strive instead for more reasonable appraisals of often painstakingly drafted manuscripts. At the end of the day, peer review should facilitate the publication of rigorously vetted quality research so as to counter misinformation, fake news, alternative facts, and conspiracy theories that I mentioned at the start. Ultimately, the goal should be to foster academic citizenship, which results in critically aware, independent thinkers that are essential for a healthy, participatory democracy. Thank you for your attention and for your interest in my topic.